Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Like Judge Reinhold and Bill Paxton appearing in Pat Benatar's Shadows of the Night music video, this is The Discriminating Gamer. Speaking of killing Nazis, ladies and gentlemen, today let's go ahead and take a look at Atlantic Chase from GMT Games. In Atlantic Chase from GMT Games, one or two players take on the role of either the Royal Navy or the Kriegsmarine as they battle for supremacy in the first few years of the Second World War in the North Atlantic. The game board is a map of the North Atlantic between Europe and the United States. You have various boxes containing different matrices and different information and holding boxes that you will use throughout this game. You'll also each have a task force sheet which will have various spaces to put different ships in, and they will also have with them various blocks and cylinders which will represent the task forces on the board. Now, there's a ton going on in this game, so I'm not going to get too much into the weeds. I'm just going to kind of give you the basic ideas of the game and tell you what my thoughts are. Now, first of all, this is a very unusual war game. You simply don't move units on the map to different spaces and conduct battles. Rather, this game is told from the perspective of the admiralties in London and Wilhelmshaven as they attempt to kind of direct the fleet actions around the North Atlantic. Now, what this means is you're not entirely aware of where the enemy ships are, or your ships are for that matter, as what happens is you create these task forces, which are the cylinders, in which case you do know where they are, but then you set courses, you set trajectories for where you want that fleet to go, where you want that fleet to be. And you do this by creating various blocks. You put various blocks along a track through the various hexes, and that represents essentially the course of your ships for that particular mission. Now, the game has a lot of different scenarios and different things you're trying to accomplish in the game, and so some things are a little bit different here and there depending on the scenarios, but essentially your basic actions remain the same. Now, when you're creating these trajectories, you're doing a few things. For instance, if ever a trajectory is essentially abuts a enemy port, you can then put an intel marker on it, and some other things will allow you to put intel markers on there as well, which essentially will come into play later in the game. There's a few other tokens and items that will also play into the game as well. Now, one of the actions you can do is an airstrike. If you've got an enemy trajectory within two spaces of an airfield, you can attempt to essentially bomb them. You have to find them and bomb them. You can also attempt to conduct a completion. Now, many of the scenarios are essentially you're trying to get a task force from one port to another port. So you create your trajectory, and you may not want to go all the way to that port. You may want to move differently at some points, and so you may not want to do that. So you create that trajectory, but if you only have 6 segments in your trajectory, you can attempt to completion, meaning you can attempt to get those ships home. Now, if you do that, your opponent does get to roll a couple of die. There will be some die modifiers, but they're attempting to steal the initiative, to essentially get a last chance to take you out before you can get to your home waters. If they are unsuccessful in seizing the initiative, then you've completed that trajectory, and then of course if you get whatever rewards are in the scenario for that. Now, if you have a task force station, that's the cylinder. If you have a station or your trajectory going through the opposing player's station, then you can engage. You can attempt to essentially fight a battle. So you go ahead and you roll the die, you consult the matrices, you consult any variables, and it's going to tell you essentially what happens. On the matrices, it'll give you the symbols. You check with player rates for the symbols, and they'll tell you exactly what happens, whether you can engage, how you can engage, or whether you get in contact, and all sorts of fun and kooky things. if you have your trajectory kind of going into the same space as an enemy trajectory, you can attempt a naval search action. Essentially, you declare that your task force is the active task force. You declare which trajectory you're trying to search for, and if you have another trajectory that also intersects their trajectory, you can have them be a kind of a support trajectory. And what you're going to do is, ideally, you want shorter segments to do this, and you want the enemy to have shorter segments to do this, because that's fewer spaces you have to search. You're going to add up all of your segments, you're going to add up all of the enemy segments, and if you have kind of that supporting player, you can attempt to take away that number of segments from your trajectory. You have to do the longest trajectory is what you're calculated. So any supporting trajectory essentially is a minus, so you get a lower number, which is what you want. If you have an intel, and you're the one doing the naval search, and you have an intel somewhere on your trajectory, then your opponent can attempt to seize the initiative. But again, you roll the die, you consult the matrices, you see exactly the matrix, you can see exactly what happens depending on whether or not you are successful in finding them. You can just choose to pass on your turn if you don't want to do anything more, and that involves a time lapse. Essentially, you pick one of your trajectories and you can shorten it. Now, each of your fleets, each of your ships in your fleet, in your task forces, has a speed on it. Fast, medium, slow, very slow, and that tells you how many trajectories you can take off the end. You can take off from either end, and so you can go ahead, and that's kind of how you advance a specific task force along its line back to its home port. You can also do reorganizing actions. Essentially, you can create two separate task forces out of one, or combine them into another, or attempt to bring reinforcements in from a holding box onto the board. You can attempt to do a signals action. Essentially, if a player has an intel marker on their trajectory, you can convert their entire trajectory into a station on that intel marker. You can attempt a stealth action. This is where you're going to use U-boats or mines to attempt to go after those task forces. And of course, you can also do a trajectory action. At any time, you can add segments to either end of the trajectory that you want. You can't branch off or fork or anything like that, and you can't take them out of the middle, but you can elongate on either side. If you are currently at a station, you can then start a trajectory. You remove the station and you begin your trajectory on the board. You can never have more than 15 segments in a trajectory. Now, also, too, weather plays into factor here. I mentioned when you pass and you get to do the time lapse, you do it according to its speed. However, if there's bad weather, you roll a die, and whatever the die is, even if it would exceed your normal speed, that's how many segments you lose. So that kind of randomizes how your segments are going to go. Each turn, at the end of each turn, you're going to have to go ahead and roll for weather. The first time, if you roll a 6, it becomes bad weather. If it's bad weather and you roll a 5 or 6, it becomes good weather. Now, in battle, you've got a battle board on the board there. You're essentially going to determine, what your range is, or your extreme range, or your close range, and this stuff's going to be given to you by the, by the engagement results. You're going to place your ships there. You're going to do gunnery. You're going to fire at them with your guns. Then you're going to do torpedoes attacks. Typically, each battle is going to last a few turns, unless you're doing a skirmish or something. You're going to do it a few turns, and a weaker player, for instance, convoys and stuff, they can attempt to break away and get out of that battle every round. So every game, players are creating these trajectories. They are attempting to search for their enemies. They are attempting to attack their enemies if that's what their scenario calls for, or they're attempting to flee and get away to their home ports. Therefore, there's a real chase element here. But players are going back and forth attempting to do these things. When they get into combat situations, they're attempting to blow their enemies out of the water. But whoever can fulfill the specific needs, the specific objectives of their scenario wins Atlantic Chase. All right, so I am really just telling you the bare bones. Now, I gave you the actions. Essentially, you can keep doing actions your whole turn until, unless the specific action says, they'll have an opportunity to seize initiative or a vie for initiative. You can keep doing what you want to do, but of course, there'll come a point where there's really nothing more to do, so that's when you pass. But you can kind of, as I say, you can keep taking actions as long as you can. This is, like I say, on the surface of it, it's an incredibly complicated game. GMT sent me this game out of the blue. I didn't request it, and it came to me, and I looked at it. My first thought was, oh, this looks freaking awesome. And then I opened the box, and if you've seen any of the unboxing videos or any of the other videos on this game, there's just so much stuff. There's like 4 or 5 rule books. There's a solo rule book. There's a tutorial book. There's a main rules book. There's an advanced rules book. There's different player aids. There's just so much stuff in this box. and it was intimidating. It is incredibly intimidating. Again, really one of the more intimidating games I've played in a while. But I thought, you know what? Everybody's saying this is great. I'm going to learn it. I'm going to play it. So where you start is it's got these tutorials. It's got, I think, 10 tutorials that you're going to play through, and then each tutorial kind of introduces new rules. So I sit down and start playing through the tutorials. I go, okay, well, this makes sense. Okay, this makes sense, and oh, this makes sense, and this makes sense. So really, when you are gradually introduced to the rules in this way through the tutorials, the game generally makes sense, and it becomes much easier to learn and to digest. It's harder than when you're playing those tutorials by yourself and you try to teach someone else how to play the game, because there's a huge learning curve here. Certainly for the person taking the tutorials there is, and you need to have the time to do it, but then also to teach it. It's incredibly high learning curve here. And just so you're aware, this is not a game you're gonna get in the mail or buy at a store, take home, and out of the box you're gonna be playing it in 15 minutes. It's not. This is a game you need to commit to study and to understand and to really engage with. But the game itself, first of all, it's incredibly unusual. Never seen a game quite like this. You know, one of the things, I'm as guilty of this as anybody, and that is when a reviewer says it's very innovative. This is an innovative system. I've done that a lot. But I gotta say, I think this is innovative. I really do. This idea of playing a war game where you don't know where the enemy is, you're hunting for them, and they're hunting for you. So but there's not really a hidden information aspect to it, because it's all right there, but it's just kind of through the die rolls and the matrix, you're trying to determine where they are and narrow it down. And I'm not to say you're entirely beholden to the matrices and the die, because you have real consequential choices here with your trajectories and building your trajectories and what you do on your turn. Some more than others. Some games more than others as far as some games are pretty straightforward what you're trying to do and what you have to do. But still, there is choice in how you go about fulfilling those objectives. You can take courses that are kind of unusual, and if you're the hunted, you want one of those long trajectories. If you're the hunter, you want shorter ones. All things being equal. But it's really enjoyable. It's once you get it figured out, and once you kind of see how the game works, it's enjoyable. It's just a matter of getting over that hump of the learning curve. And having said that, and I'm going to be perfectly blunt here, I played this game a few times now, and I still feel like in the back of my head, maybe I'm playing a few things wrong here or there, and I don't like that. And I don't fault the game for that. I think that's just me. But my point is, you really got to commit to learning this game to learn it. I'm going to play it again. I had fun with it. I will have fun, and I will keep playing and learning it. Because it is so unusual, and it's so compelling on so many levels. And it's just, at the end of the day, we do this because it's fun. And this game's fun. It's a fun game. It's a fun experience. And again, I've not seen anything like it before. So the recommendation for the discriminating gamer for Atlantic Chase is, with the caveat, there's a huge learning curve and a huge teaching curve. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say buy it. I think for guys that are willing to invest, or girls who are willing to invest the time into learning the system, you will be rewarded. Thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Wargame Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. I'd ask you to also check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson, PhD, where I actually discuss military history, a lot of World War II history there. We talk about book spawn history and concepts in history. Please check that out. Please subscribe to that. And we'd also ask you to go ahead and give a thumb to this video on Board Game Geek. That helps us out a lot as well. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll leave you with this little anecdote of family history. My grandfather actually joined the Navy out of spite. He was a petty officer. Please somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I've been dying. Once a year I wind up in the band. Left arc, still at 2 to 6.
little scout.
Yes!